Chris Johnson always knew she wanted to serve her country and meet the right partner to serve beside.
You know, he was the epitome of duty, honor, country, someone that you can trust.
Chris and Jim were going to have an absolutely wonderful life together.
What if the person you believed in most betrayed you?
You know, my gut kept saying something was off.
What if they'd betrayed everybody?
He could do whatever the hell he wanted.
He knew that he's possibly facing a court-martial.
Taking a stand could cost everything.
She was put in a real terrible situation and had to make some hard choices.
I just feared everything.
I couldn't believe that Colonel Johnson would do this.
Because I'm the one that blew the whistle.
That's when everything started to blow up, actually.
I fled. I didn't know at that point what he was capable of. So, the young me, wow. As a kid, I was a tomboy. I was always a competitive athlete. In my teen years, I was in beauty pageants, and I was Miss New York teenager. The Army always attracted me. And then in college, I decided to join Army or ROTC.
Chris is thriving in college. There's only one drawback.
Mount St. Mary was almost, at that time, almost all women.
Just 9 miles south on the banks of the Hudson River is another college. This one, almost all men.
West Point United States Military Academy is the place where serious cadets go to become career or professional officers.
On Halloween night in 1985, Chris and her girlfriends make an impromptu visit.
We went trick-or-treating in the barracks at West Point. You know, we weren't supposed to be there, but here we were, and Jim was the cadet company commander, and I had dressed up as a baby, and so I had a baby bottle and a blanket. Jim was sitting at his desk studying, trying to ignore what was going on around him. You could tell he was so uncomfortable having this group of giggling girls, and they're all dressed in goofy costumes. I remember going over and just talking to him. I was like, wow, this is really, this guy, you know, this guy really has his stuff together. I made chocolate chip cookies, and Jim made a point of returning the tin to me. And he said, you know, they were the best chocolate chip cookies I ever had. And they say, you know, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. I guess that might have been true a little bit, so. We met at the beginning of my junior year, the beginning of his senior year, and by the end of the year, you know, we just both knew that this is somebody we want to spend the rest of our lives with. You know, he was the epitome of duty, honor, country. That's something you want to be around. I mean, that's the kind of person you want to trust and build a life with. Someone that you can trust. His father was a general, and he was stationed in the Pentagon. Lieutenant General James Houston Johnson. They were known sort of as Fort Bragg airborne royalty.
After graduation, Jim continues officers training, while Chris goes to ROTC Airborne School.
At that time, not a lot of women went through airborne school, and I was the only woman in my chalk. At the final graduation jump, he pinned my wings on, and the wings he gave me were the ones his father pinned onto him when he graduated from airborne school. You know, I just thought that that was really special. The day after that, it was a weekend, and I remember him saying, I'm gonna fix us a nice breakfast. The table was set for breakfast, and there was a bouquet of a dozen roses. And he got down on one knee and put the ring on me and asked me to marry him. So it was very romantic and very sweet. We got married on May 17th, 1987. I remember friends saying, I've never seen someone walk down the aisle so confident. Just felt so right.
When they come out of the church, they have the saber bearers who form an arch.
Two people in the front put the sabers down and cross and say, you know, you can only pass with a kiss. So, of course, the bride and groom have to kiss in front of everybody.
Right from the beginning, Chris understood that, you know, Jim would be in command, but Chris would be the commander's wife. Chris embraced that.
Chris puts her own military career on hold, and she and Jim raise 2 children while moving from base to base.
I got involved in the community learned the skill of being an Army wife and supported the career.
Army team couples is what we would call them. When they work well together, there's a halo effect.
We were a really awesome team, and they were building him to take on more advanced senior leadership roles.
Truly a great day to be here at Fort Benning, the home of the infantry.
Yeah, we had a happy marriage and happy family. We had a great life.
Jim's career is on the rise, at a time when the U.S. military needs more good leaders.
On my orders, the United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
He deployed to Afghanistan with the 82nd. They were a rapid deployment force. Jim got promoted to lieutenant colonel during that time. He came home the following year in 2003, was home for about 3 months, but he'd been selected to command a battalion. They were 101st Airborne Division in Iraq.
This will be a campaign unlike any other in history. A campaign characterized by shock, by surprise, and by the application of overwhelming force.
The children and I moved to Fort Campbell, Kentucky by ourselves because he had already left to go to Iraq. And in September 2005, he deployed again as a battalion commander. And I had concerns that he would be burnt out.
After being apart for almost 4 years, Jim finally returns home. It should be a happy reunion, but something's not right. He's cold and distant, even with his own children.
Jim changed during that deployment. Walking back from the soccer field for one of our children's games, he would just divert off and come back and show up 30 minutes later. Nothing I did was pleasing him. Nothing I did was good enough. All of a sudden, he's not initiating sex at all. So this is when the suspicion starts coming up. Something's not right. He's withdrawing from me. Intimacy is on a decline. What is up?
But then they receive the best possible news.
Jim was selected to command the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Italy, probably the most sought-after infantry brigade command in the United States Army.
We were very excited about it because we were all moving to Europe as a family.
In the summer of 2008, the family relocates to an idyllic residence in Vicenza.
We're finally all together in Europe, and it just didn't feel right. He started getting angry, and I started feeling like I was walking on eggshells around him. I'll never forget one day, too, during that time, he just looked at me and said, "Is this all there is?" Here, we'd worked so hard as a team to get to this, and it was hurtful.
By the end of the year, the relationship is even more strained.
Jim was always engaged with our family. We would do silly things like watch American Idol and all vote together, and he just didn't want to do those things. December 2008 was one of the most miserable Christmases I've ever had. Yeah. So many things weren't making sense. He was insistent that we were going to do a New Year's Eve party. I was worn out and thought, let's just enjoy the holidays as a family. We know you're going to deploy again next year. He said, oh, by the way, we're going to have this Iraqi family join us for this New Year's Eve weekend. And they were going to stay in the house with us.
Jim explains that he became acquainted with the Al-Attar family during his 2 tours in Iraq.
And that he said, there are interpreters. You understand that, right?
There's multiple interpreters at every level inside of a brigade operation. They are part of that same close-knit network for whom you would do almost anything.
I found out he's going to drive to the Netherlands and pick up this family 6 hours up, 6 hours back. And he doesn't have a vehicle big enough to fit them. So he's going to take a vehicle, a van, out of the motor pool, the brigade motor pool, a government-owned vehicle. And he's going to use it for personal reasons. That is a huge no-no. You don't do that. He'd never be that kind of guy that would do that. You know, he didn't lie, cheat, or steal. You know, my gut kept saying something was off. And I couldn't put my finger on it.
Jim arrives home with his friends and presents Aladdin Alatar, his wife Shrek, and their 24-year-old daughter, Haveen.
I remember the father had a heavy mustache. The mother was kind of your frumpy housewife. And her daughter, she had long, dark hair, wore very dark makeup, and she had a young child.
For the first few moments, it seems like this could be a happy New Year's weekend after all. Until Jim does something subtle. Something only Chris, his wife of 20 years, would find shocking.
He scooped down and picked up the 14-month-old, and the child didn't flinch. Jim wasn't somebody that held other people's children, never scooped up a friend's child. It was woman's intuition. And right then and there, I realized that there's something about this family that's just not right. There was something going on here.
Chris is only about to discover the reason for her husband's distance.
In a very, very tiny community locked inside of Italy, there is a patent place of the highest order. There's no secrets.
Jim had gone against everything that the Army and West Point had taught him.
He's doing way worse. He's self-destructing. And little did I know, it was just the very beginning.
He destroyed his family, destroyed his name. He lost everything.
Colonel Jim Johnson is acting completely out of character at the family's New Year's dinner, especially with his interpreter's 24-year-old daughter, Haveen.
I remember not being able to eat. Everything about this is off. They had their own little private corner down on the end of the table. Haveen had a digital camera in her hands, and Jim was messing with it. And it was the same camera I had been given for Christmas. And he'd given her one too, exact thing. I really didn't know how to process it. You're just ingesting it and trying to take the next breath. Keep your composure, don't fall apart in front of these people. That night, and I asked him if, he was having an affair with her. And he said, no, her family would kill her or disown her. Not, I don't feel that way about her. And then I asked him, well, have you kissed her? And he said, yes, but not passionately. What the hell does that mean?
That weekend, Jim tells Chris he wants to take the Alatars shopping at the Army PX.
One of my children said, oh, yeah, we had to wait for Haveen to make her grand entrance down the stairs because we were all sitting around just waiting for her. And she was upstairs doing I don't know what. Haveen is gonna get shoes for the baby. And at one point, Jim's like, oh, I'm gonna go over here. You take Haveen up to the register and pay for what she wants. So she's got these shoes. And on the way to the register, she finds a cute little sweater for herself. She picks out shampoo and other things for herself, just loading up on whatever product she's looking for. And I'm like floored. The mother, she would go outside and smoke cigarettes. During that whole weekend, she would go out and smoke a cigarette and leave the butt on the ground. Who does that? I ended up cleaning 12 cigarette butts off the ground when they left.
When Jim makes the overnight trip to take the Alatars back to the Netherlands, Chris is left alone to wonder how much trouble her relationship is in.
But I didn't want to believe that he was having sex with her. I still didn't want to believe it. I went into his office when I opened the top drawer, and I saw a notepad. And he had written 3 columns: divorce now, divorce in 6 months, divorce a year from now. And he had plotted out which would be most advantageous to him. I just remember when I found that note, feeling like the blood had drained from my face. That weekend I not only cooked, but I remember running a load of laundry for them. I did. my husband's mistress's laundry. Jim got home and I said, I found a note in your desk today. And I said, are you divorcing me? And he looked at me shocked. He said, well, I'm sorry you saw that. No. And then he said, well, is that what you want? I said, no, I don't want a divorce. I want us to work things out.
When you have an affair in the military, if it's discovered, it normally doesn't turn out well for you in your career, which is why there's always denial, which is why you double down on denial.
Jim denies the affair, but Chris remains dubious.
I knew that the child, Haveen's daughter, could not have been Jim's. He had a vasectomy in June 2000. I think she was born in like November 2007. It's not his child. I kept looking. And I don't know if I was still trying to look for something to prove myself wrong or just prove myself right. Well, I finally did. He has a black book, and in the back, he had all these secret email accounts. And that opened up, at that point, 3 years of emails that he had been communicating with Haveen. And some of them were so juvenile. Like, reading them were embarrassing. It was like he was a teenager, a horny teenager. Literally. One of the emails she wrote to him was like, I'm your little shaitan. It means devil in Arabic. That, yeah, I mean, you're a little shaitan, we make trouble all your life. Kissy, kissy. As the emails progressed between them, I started realizing certain things he was saying with her that corresponded with events in our life. Like him taking money out of one of our personal accounts. He had taken $10,000 and converted it to euro and gave it to her. My legs started shaking. I couldn't stop it. And I thought, screw this, I'm calling him. Woke him up and screamed in the phone, are you her? He can't deny he's having an affair. And of course he said, you're recording this call. Someone's listening in. He wouldn't answer the question. It then led to me insisting that we go to counseling to see the family life chaplain in Vicenza, because I was not about to give up. I was not going to throw the towel in. I thought I'm going to fight for my marriage. Unfortunately, there's a fair amount of adultery in the Army. Chaplains are there to help preserve marriages. The chaplain gave us this book. The book was about adultery. I don't even remember the name of the book. I hated it. It just made me so angry. One page said, the person having the affair, it's not your fault. And he just grasped onto that. Like, look, it's not all my fault. It's your fault too that I'm doing this. You know, it allowed Jim to give himself permission to continue to blame me for his actions, which is insane.
If you're a psychologist, this is standard transference. It's transference of blame to somebody else so that you can feel good about yourself, and you build this case, you actually begin to believe it.
Of course, now I look back and he lied even to this chaplain during our counseling. Not only did he not stop the affair, he continued it and got even more deeply involved. A credit card receipt from his work credit card came to our mail, and I opened it up, and there was charges on there that didn't make sense. He was using his government credit card for her VoIP account so they could communicate. He did not stop at all. So then I'm starting to walk around with this big, deep, dark secret. Because if word got out that he was having an affair, his career's over. You know, the Army doesn't tolerate adultery. And so I had this burden now. I'm like, now what do I do with this? You know, I'd invested everything in him. You know, our family was invested. Our children had sacrificed for him to do what his country called him to do. I believed in it. Our children believed in it.
Chris has a very strong sense of right and wrong, very strong morals.
Jim was about to go down to combat with these guys again. I thought that the disruption of having your commander taken out, I did not want to cause a disruption in the brigade. And I knew I had to dig up whatever strength I had to handle this with as much grace as I could and to protect Jim. protect him from himself at this point.
Despite the betrayal, Chris continues to put Jim's needs first. And so does Jim.
Jim called early November, how soon can you be ready for a trip? I was like, well, where am I going? And he said, I've gotten a plane ticket for you and you're going to leave Italy. The only way I can fix our marriage is for you not to be there when I come home. I want you gone. I didn't know at that point what he was capable of.
He knows how to plan, he knows how to execute, he knows how to do war gaming, action, reaction, counter-reaction. Revenge becomes very, very powerful.
Noted, I'm Colonel Jim Johnson, commander of the 173rd Airborne Brigade Combat Team, stationed in...
Chris Johnson's husband is wielding his powers as an Army colonel to force her from their home in Vicenza, Italy.
In a normal press conference format.
He's kicking me out. Jim had also said on the phone call, I'm revoking your command sponsorship, which means I'm not allowed to stay in Europe as a family member. I'm gone. I can't stay.
It is very unique to see the brigade commander's wife return unless they choose to go home. Very, very odd.
I remember shaking. There was something in the tone of Jim's voice that scared me.
Jim is not only pushing Chris out, he's demanding she leave their children behind.
I didn't know at that point what he was capable of. He's the only Army brigade commander in all of Italy. No one questions you.
There was no way Chris would leave her children in a foreign country and come back to the States without them. No way.
I decided for my safety and my children's safety, we're just gonna leave. So I ran over to the school and withdrew the children. And then I got one-way plane tickets to leave Italy. I fled. I felt like I fled Italy. And I remember landing in JFK, meeting my parents, getting in the car. And I just remember looking out the window and thinking, now what? Now what do I do? I don't have a job. I have no money. I have nothing. Now what?
5 days later, Jim tracks Chris down at her parents' home.
Kept trying to call. He was calling my parents, and finally I just decided, okay, I'll answer the phone and tell him, stop harassing my mom and dad. I'm here. Our children are safe. My children were very angry with him because they knew about the affair. They met her. I mean, they spent a weekend with this woman that they knew their father was involved with.
Over the next 2 months, the battle over custody intensifies.
He had tried 2 emergency injunctions out of a court in Florida to get emergency custody, and were both denied. There was no cause for it.
In response, Jim initiates an obscure legal maneuver called the Hague Petition.
My understanding of the Hague Petition, he was claiming Chris had kidnapped the child and taken the child back to the United States against Jim's wishes, orders, permission.
Jim is desperate for custody.
He knows how to plan, he knows how to execute, he knows how to do war gaming, action, reaction, counter-reaction. Revenge becomes very, very powerful.
Chris is further stunned when she gets news from Vicenza.
By the end of December, I got a phone call from my neighbor, and she said, Chris, there's been a young woman with a child seen coming and going from your quarters in Vicenza. He had moved his mistress into our house with her kid.
Relationships with foreign nationals are always scrutinized. You're not allowed to have a foreign relationship without reporting that up through your security clearance. It is a security issue.
He just let her roll right in and sleep on my pillow and eat off my dishes. She was just gonna roll in and take the place of Chris Johnson. And it was at that point I realized no one's gonna stop him. He's blatant about the fact that he's having an affair.
Jim had gone against everything that the Army and West Point had taught him beyond the point of no return.
That's when I realized, okay, you know, I need to do something. And I thought, that's it. I've got to let the commanding general know. It was a moral decision for me to just sit back and not say anything. How do you look yourself in the mirror? I sat at my parents' computer. I typed like 5 pages, and I disclosed the email accounts that Jim had, the email accounts that Haveen had that I knew she used to communicate with him, the dates that I knew he had been with her, the misuse of government resources, the cell phone, the government credit card, like all the things I knew about.
After receiving Chris's letter, the Army immediately starts an administrative investigation, known as a 15-6.
By February, the 15-6 then rolled into a criminal investigation.
Meanwhile, the battle over the Hague petition escalates.
Jim's contention was that I was kicked off post because I was a disruption. He and his father both wrote affidavits saying that I was this disruption on the Army post, and that's why I was kicked off post, and that I was ordered to leave our children behind. But he was just trying to find anything to make my life hell. Jim called once and said, I'm going to send U.S. Marshals to the house, and you're going to get arrested. And that lasted for about 2 months. I mean, it was scary because who deals with a Hague? I'm being, accused of kidnapping our children and across international borders, and it was 2 months of hell. It was amazing feeling when the judge ruled in my favor. My attorneys cried, I cried. I mean, they were so relieved. Stress will do terrible things to your body. I started getting sick, like a pain, abdominal pain, and found out ultimately that I had a pre-malignant tumor the size of a grapefruit on the tail of my pancreas. I had surgery December of 2011, and it was a much more complicated surgery than they had anticipated, and I ended up in the hospital for a week. I got a phone call from the hospital the day after I came home, and they said, well, we've just tried putting your claim into the military health insurance, and they've denied it. You're not covered. You owe us $100,000.
It was devastating. It's not like she had a lot of money.
As a military spouse, Chris should be fully covered.
I couldn't drive. I was still on meds. I still, stitches and, still kind of a mess. And so my sister drove me to the ID card office on West Point. And I, sat down with a woman and handed her my ID card, and she pulled up the information on the computer and said, oh, well, you're divorced. I said, no, I'm not. She goes, yeah, on September 23rd, you got divorced. So they go ahead and shred my ID card, and I just lose it. I just start crying. I'm not divorced. But they knew immediately something fishy was up.
West Point's ID card office notifies the Army's Criminal Investigation Division.
They had alerted Army CID. Because of all that, that's when the Army decided to do a preliminary look to investigate.
I get a phone call from Paul Danley, and he introduces himself as the lead CID agent investigating my husband. And he says, here's what we found out. Jim filed divorce registration. I'm going to scan a copy to you, and I want you to look at it. Your signature's on it. Can you tell me if you've ever seen it before?
That's when everything started to blow up, actually. And it appeared that the divorce decree, or whatever it was called, looked like it was just a copy of a marriage license from when he and Chris got married in New York, with some things changed. Basically,
he created his own certificate of divorce registration. He forged my signature, made up a signature of a clerk in Monroe, and signed his name.
He filed that with the military. Again, that's a crime.
He said, oh, and by the way, Jim and Haveen got married. On November 9th, they got married.
I couldn't believe that Colonel Johnson would do this. Fake a divorce decree, and then marry Haveen while he's still married to Chris Johnson.
My husband had committed bigamy. Bigamy. Every time I turned around, I thought, now what?
And then all of a sudden, we're getting calls from Vicenza saying, hey, you need to come here. They found a lot more information than what was in Chris Johnson's letter.
Colonel Jim Johnson, who was once committed to duty, honor, and country, has broken his oath in a startling way.
I mean, he committed bigamy. I remember just saying, I can't make this up. One of my children sent their dad an email later, and all it said was, how was the wedding? Was there cake?
It turns out that Jim has been on the radar of CID investigator Paul Danley for some time.
The whole thing started with a contract fraud investigation over in Afghanistan. The contracting office had alerted Army CID because there was a Colonel Johnson, that was raising a ruckus because his contractor wasn't getting paid. They were fairly low-level contracts. This is for cultural support services. They can understand why Colonel Johnson was berating them for not paying this contract when they had other, bigger issues going on. Water, feeding the troops, etc. And they said it was so bad that, it raised red flags. We thought the investigation was done, and out of the blue, Chris contacted me.
Chris provides the missing piece of the puzzle. The fact that the contractor in question is Jim's mistress's dad, Aladdin Alatar.
Why are you dating the contractor's daughter when you're paying her father? That's a big red flag.
So you got an Iraqi man advising on culture in Afghanistan. Apples, oranges, just didn't make sense.
Aladdin Alatar was actually living in The Hague in the Netherlands. He knew nothing about Afghanistan. So it raised just a lot of questions about why this contract was even signed.
Paul asks Chris to provide anything else she can. Emails, credit card statements, travel records.
They started putting the pieces together. So then when I said, by the way, he was also exchanging bank account information with Aladdin, they realized that there was way more to it. He was having an inappropriate relationship, among other things, fraud, misuse of government resources, the whole 9 yards.
Then we discovered that Colonel Johnson had given a phone to the Alatars, a government phone, I should say. And one of the bills came back, I think it was over $30,000 for a month, just for 1 month of cell phone usage.
But there's more. Investigators going through Jim's computer hard drive uncover questionable financial deals worth millions.
They'd found that Colonel Johnson had tried to have a almost $10 million contract let for windmills. The whole contract was spun up as being a way to get water to troops in remote posts, that they'd be able to produce their own water. So when I talked to the company rep for this windmill company, he explained that they wouldn't work in Afghanistan. Someone was trying to push through a contract, almost $10 million for these windmills that wouldn't work. Why are we doing this?
The money trail leads back to Jim and to Havin's father.
Aladdin Alatar had supposedly found these, or was working for this Dutch company that developed the windmills. If this contract had been signed, Aladdin would have got approximately $500,000 as a finder's fee. So that's a big flag. You get the same contractor, you're dating his daughter, and all of a sudden, he's gonna get $500,000.
Chris's information makes it possible for the Army to build a solid case on Jim's financial misdeeds. They also find blatant proof of Jim's adultery.
Jim and Haveen made a sex tape, and he kept it on his government computer. They found it on his hard drive.
The greatest disgrace is where and when the tryst was recorded.
He was in Iraq and not in Afghanistan with his brigade. His brigade just went off to war. He's supposed to be leading his soldiers, and instead he's screwing around with his mistress. He's not a leader.
Army investigators have learned all they need to know about Jim Johnson. They're ready to prosecute. Jim is arraigned on a total of 27 charges, with a maximum possible sentence of 54 years.
The charges range from adultery, bigamy, fraud, misuse of government resources, and conduct unbecoming of an officer.
The Army flies Chris to Germany to attend a trial her email helped trigger, and which could cost Jim and her everything.
When you're married, as long as I was, to Jim, upon a divorce, you are eligible for up to half of the service member's military retirement. But if Jim's criminal behavior led to him being dismissed or incarcerated, those benefits would have been taken from him, and so then half of nothing would be nothing for me.
Jim's not going to be the only one that's going to be punished. Chris and the children are going to be punished as well.
Made my stomach churn.
Jim Johnson has not been shut down. Even in the midst of a court-martial, he's about to show his own family how destructive he can be.
Jim was going out of his way to do anything he could to cause Chris and their children pain.
It was just unbelievable. I was so hurt. I just blown away, numb.
I think it's horrible. I think that's the worst of it all.
On June 12, 2012, disgraced Army Colonel Jim Johnson gets his day in court, and Chris is there to watch over the proceedings every step of the way.
You know, I remember one time him looking at me, just, you know, if he could kill me with his eyes, he would have, because I'm the one that blew the whistle.
The original list of 27 charges has come down to 2 counts of conduct unbecoming an officer and a gentleman by the time the trial starts.
He pled guilty to 15 charges. He had to plead guilty to adultery because they had a videotape of it.
I testified during the trial, testified for a couple days at least.
The prosecution presents an irrefutable case, thanks in part to the evidence Chris has provided them.
It seemed like the panel was getting close to, not only convicting him, but, giving him a sentence, involving some incarceration or maybe a dishonorable discharge from the military.
Jim's attorneys now put anyone willing to testify in defense of Jim on the stand, including Jim's father.
His father said, "My son is an honest man. My son's an honorable man. He's not a liar. My son's not a criminal." Dude, your son is a criminal. He just pled guilty to 15 charges, and now you're up on the witness stand saying, "My son's not a criminal." Really?
Both sides rest their case. It takes the jury only a few hours to reach their decision. Jim Johnson is convicted on 2 counts of conduct unbecoming of an officer. The Army pronounces his behavior to be of a nature to bring discredit upon the armed forces.
What happened to the guy that, embodied duty on our country? What happened to the man that, doesn't lie, cheat, or steal, and tolerate those who do?
Jim's sentencing hearing is one last chance to acknowledge the pain he's caused. But he doesn't do that. Instead, he uses the opportunity to plead with the court not to send him to jail, so he can care for his beloved Haveen.
He was talking about, allowing him to go back and save her and keep her from being deported. He also made a comment, he's like, "Haveen and her daughter are the center of my life." And one of my children behind me heard that and just started sobbing. Our children used to be the center of his life. His family, us, was the center of his life.
He destroyed the relationship with his children. He chose to do that. It's just, it's so sad.
5 years confinement or pay a $300,000 fine. That was his sentence. His father wrote a check for $300,000 and paid the fine. He could have gotten up to 54 years in prison. Instead, he walked out of the courtroom as a colonel with eagles still on his shoulders. Justice wasn't served.
Jim should have gone to jail for what he did, But if he did go to jail, Chris and the children would have been catastrophic for them.
Chris does finally divorce Jim Johnson, for real this time.
From what I understand, he's still with Haveen and her daughter. We have no communication. Our children are essentially estranged from him.
Chris and her kids get half of Jim's pension and benefits. She knows not everyone is as lucky.
There's no whistleblower protection for spouses. So you tolerate illegal and immoral behavior, or you turn them in and you risk losing everything. And that's what led me into working on some legislation.
Chris amazes me. She fought for herself and she fought for her children, and now she's fighting for other families.
What we ultimately created was called the Family Served 2 Military Justice Reform Act. And what that would allow is, if a service member commits misconduct, it allows the service to properly punish the lawbreaker without financial repercussions on the family. The benefits that the families also earn are protected. So that'll be my swan song from the Army. That'll be the last kind of move I do to help take care of families. I'm at peace where I'm at now, and I hope my story gives other spouses hope. You know, you can rebuild. You can have a happy, successful life after going through something so painful. You know, it's just nice to know that someone else who's dealt with it and has gotten through the tunnel towards the light and life is good again.
The last person to see Emily Dawson alive remembered one strange detail. She wasn't afraid. That was what haunted investigators for more than 3 decades. Because when someone disappears without a trace, people expect fear. They expect panic. They expect a final desperate moment. But Emily Dawson did not look like someone running from danger. She looked like someone who believed she would be home by morning. At 9:42 p.m. on a cold October night in 1989, Emily parked her silver sedan outside a small roadside market in the quiet town of Cedar Hollow, Washington. The store clerk remembered her clearly. 28 years old, dark hair, blue jacket, a grocery bag in one hand. A familiar face in a town where everyone knew everyone. She bought coffee, a newspaper, and a pack of batteries. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested the next few hours would become one of Washington State's most haunting mysteries. The clerk later told investigators Emily smiled before leaving. She said goodbye. She walked outside. She unlocked her car. And then she disappeared. The vehicle was found less than 2 miles away. The driver's door was open. The keys were still inside. The headlights were still shining into the darkness. On the passenger seat sat the newspaper she had just purchased. The coffee cup remained untouched. Her purse was gone. Her coat was gone. But Emily Dawson was nowhere. No footprints. No witnesses. No explanation. Only a silent car sitting beneath the rain. And that was the beginning of a mystery that would consume an entire community. A case that would survive 35 years. A case that would eventually become known as one of Washington's most disturbing cold cases. Because the question was never only where Emily went. The question was, who made sure she never came back? The first hours after her disappearance were filled with urgency. Deputies searched the surrounding forests. Volunteers walked through muddy fields. Dogs followed trails along the highway. Helicopters scanned the mountains. Cedar Hollow was a kind of place where people believed nothing truly terrible could happen. A town surrounded by thick forests and quiet roads. A place where neighbors left doors unlocked. A place where everyone recognized the sound of familiar vehicles passing by. Emily fit perfectly into that world. She was a local school counselor. She helped troubled teenagers. She organized community events. She was known as the person people called when they needed someone to listen. Her disappearance shocked everyone, because Emily was not someone who vanished. She was not reckless. She was not impulsive. She had no history of running away, no secret plans, no known enemies. Her family immediately knew something was wrong. Her younger brother, Daniel, told investigators the same thing repeatedly. She would never leave like this. Those words became the foundation of the entire investigation because detectives understood something important. People disappear every day, but sometimes the people who know them best are the first to recognize when something impossible has happened. The original investigation moved quickly. Detectives interviewed everyone close to Emily, friends, co-workers, neighbors, former relationships, anyone who might explain what happened. At first, the case appeared straightforward. A missing woman, a possible abduction, a vehicle left behind. But every direction investigators followed led to another dead end. Emily's personal life revealed no obvious threats. Her job created no major conflicts. Her finances were normal. Her phone records showed ordinary conversations. Nothing. The case had no beginning, no middle, no ending. Just a blank space where answers should have been. Then, 3 weeks after Emily disappeared, investigators found the first major clue. A volunteer searching an abandoned logging road discovered something buried beneath wet leaves. A small silver bracelet. Emily's bracelet. The one she wore almost every day. The discovery changed the investigation because the bracelet was located nearly 12 miles from where her car was found. That meant one of two things. Either Emily had traveled there willingly, or someone had taken her. The search expanded immediately. The logging roads were examined. The surrounding forest was searched again. Investigators brought in additional teams, but the forest revealed nothing. No clothing, no evidence, no remains, only the bracelet. A single piece of jewelry sitting in the wilderness like a message. But a message from whom? The case continued for months, then years. The headlines faded. The search party stopped. The questions remained. By 1995, Emily Dawson's disappearance had officially become a cold case. The file moved from an active investigation shelf to a storage room filled with forgotten mysteries. A thick folder, a faded photograph, a name slowly disappearing from public memory. But Emily's family never stopped searching. Her mother kept her bedroom untouched. Her brother continued calling investigators every year. Every anniversary of her disappearance, the family returned to the same roadside market where Emily was last seen. They stood beneath the same streetlights. They looked at the same road, waiting for an answer that never came. For decades, investigators came and went. Different detectives, different theories, different possibilities. Some believed Emily was targeted by someone she knew. Others suspected a stranger passing through town. Some believed the answer was hidden inside the forest. Others believed it was hidden inside the people who lived nearby. But nothing could be proven until one retired officer decided to look again. His name was Mark Reynolds. He had spent 30 years with the Washington State Patrol. During his career, he worked hundreds of investigations. But after retirement, one case continued bothering him. Emily Dawson. Not because he had solved it, because he hadn't. Mark had been a young officer when Emily disappeared. He remembered the frustration. He remembered the empty searches. He remembered the feeling that something had been missed. Decades later, while organizing old files for a local historical project, he found a copy of the original case report. He expected to feel nostalgia. Instead, he felt something else. A question. Why had one piece of evidence never been fully examined? The fingerprint card. Inside Emily's abandoned car, investigators had collected several fingerprints. Most belonged to Emily. Some belonged to family members. One print remained unidentified. Back in 1989, the technology was limited. The fingerprint was compared against local records. No match. The investigation moved on. The evidence was stored away, forgotten. But Mark Reynolds knew something younger investigators often understood better than older ones. Technology changes. Old evidence does not. He requested access to the original fingerprint card. The paper was fragile. The ink was faded. But the print remained, waiting. A new forensic database could compare millions of records. A comparison that was impossible in 1989. A comparison that took only minutes in the modern era. Mark watched as a computer searched. 1 second. 5 seconds. 30 seconds. Then, a result appeared. Match found. Mark stared at the screen. The name was not random. It was not a stranger. It was someone who had been connected to Emily's life. Someone investigators had interviewed decades earlier. Someone whose name appeared in the original case file. Someone nobody had ever considered a suspect. The retired officer printed the report. Then he read it again, because after 35 years, the cold case had finally found its first real answer. The fingerprint belonged to Thomas Vale, Emily Dawson's former colleague, a respected teacher, a community volunteer, a man who had publicly searched for Emily after she disappeared, a man who had told investigators in 1989 that he barely knew her, but the fingerprint said something different. And suddenly, the investigation that had been frozen for decades started moving again. The name on the fingerprint report changed everything. Thomas Vale, a name that had been buried inside the original investigation for 35 years, a name that investigators remembered, a name that had never raised enough suspicion to become a focus. Until now, retired Officer Mark Reynolds stared at the report sitting on his desk. The fingerprint match was undeniable. The question was not whether Thomas Vale had touched Emily Dawson's car. The question was, why had he lied about it? Because in 1989, Thomas Vale had given investigators a statement that seemed harmless. He said he had not seen Emily on the night she disappeared. He said he had no reason to visit the roadside market. He said their relationship was strictly professional. A simple answer. A believable answer. And at the time, detectives had no reason to challenge him. Thomas Vale was everything people trusted. 40 years old when Emily disappeared. A history teacher at Cedar Hollow High School. Married. Father of 2. A volunteer coach. A respected member of the community. The kind of person neighbors describe with the same words. Reliable. Kind. Helpful. The kind of person nobody wanted to believe could be connected to something terrible. But cold cases are built on uncomfortable truths. Sometimes a person everyone trusts is the person nobody investigates. Mark reopened the original interview records. He read every statement connected to Thomas Vale. The first interview took place 4 days after Emily vanished. The detective's notes described him as cooperative, calm, concerned. Thomas had even joined the volunteer search teams. He walked through forests. He handed out missing person flyers. He attended community meetings. He stood beside Emily's family while they begged for answers. At the time, investigators saw a grieving friend. Now Mark saw something else. Someone who stayed close to the investigation. Someone who knew exactly what police knew. Someone who could follow every development. Mark requested a full background review. The results revealed something interesting. Thomas Vale had known Emily longer than he admitted, not just professionally. Personally, they had attended the same college. They had worked together before moving to Cedar Hollow. Phone records from 1989 showed dozens of calls between them. Some lasted more than an hour. But when investigators originally asked Thomas about their relationship, he minimized it. Why? That question became the center of the reopened investigation. Mark contacted former detectives who worked the case. Many were surprised. One retired investigator, Linda Foster, remembered Thomas immediately. He was always around. That sentence stayed with Mark. Always around. Linda explained that Thomas was present during nearly every major moment of the investigation. The first search, the press conferences, the family meetings, the evidence reviews. He wanted to help, Linda said. Then she paused. Or maybe he wanted to know what we knew. That possibility changed the entire perception of the case. Investigators began rebuilding Emily's final week, not from old assumptions, from evidence. 7 days before disappearing, Emily had told a friend something unusual. She was worried. The friend, Rachel Morgan, had never spoken publicly about it, but when Mark contacted her, she finally agreed. I thought it was just stress. What did she say? Rachel looked down. She said someone was watching her. The statement had never appeared in the original investigation because Rachel had never told police. Why? Fear. She explained that after Emily disappeared, someone contacted her. Someone warned her not to talk. At the time, Rachel believed it was a cruel prank, but decades later, she wasn't so sure. Who contacted you? Rachel hesitated, then answered, Thomas. The room went silent. Mark asked for details. Rachel explained that 3 days after Emily vanished, Thomas came to her home. He asked what Emily had told her. He asked if Emily had mentioned him. He asked whether she had any letters, messages, or documents. At the time, Rachel thought Thomas was simply worried. Now it looked different. Much different. The investigation shifted. Detectives began examining Thomas Vale's life after Emily's disappearance. And what they found was strange. Within months, Thomas resigned from Cedar Hollow High School. He moved away, changed careers, stopped contacting many people from town. He told friends he needed a fresh start. Nobody questioned it. Until now, investigators tracked him down. Thomas Vale was living in Oregon, 75 years old, retired, living quietly. When detectives arrived at his home, he appeared surprised, but not shocked, almost as if he knew this day might come. The first question was simple. Did you know Emily Dawson? Thomas looked at the detectives, then looked away. Of course I knew Emily. Your fingerprint was found inside her vehicle. A long silence followed. Then Thomas said something unexpected. I wonder how long that would take. The detectives exchanged looks, because that was not the reaction of someone hearing an accusation for the first time. It was the reaction of someone who had been waiting. Thomas agreed to speak, but he immediately denied killing Emily. He admitted he had been inside her car. He admitted he had lied, but he claimed there was a reason he believed was protecting someone. Who? Thomas refused to answer. Instead, he told detectives something disturbing. Emily wasn't running away from a stranger. Then who was she running from? Thomas looked toward the window. Someone she trusted. The interview ended without an arrest, but it opened a new direction, because for the first time in 35 years, investigators had a witness who suggested Emily's disappearance was not random. It was personal. That night, Mark returned to the original evidence file. He searched every page, every note, every photograph. Then he found something strange. A handwritten message from the original lead detective, a note that had never been included in official reports. It was written after Thomas Vale's first interview. Only 4 words. He knows something. No explanation. No follow-up. Just 4 words. Forgotten for decades. Mark wondered why. Why did the detective write that? Why was Thomas never investigated further? The answer came from old case logs. In 1989, investigators were overwhelmed. The community was desperate. Every day, without Emily, created pressure. And Thomas had something detectives needed. Access. He knew the school. He knew Emily's routine. He knew the community. He helped. And sometimes, the people who help investigations become invisible, because nobody wants to believe the helper is the problem. The reopened investigation continued. Detectives searched Thomas's old property records. They discovered he had owned a cabin outside Cedar Hollow in 1989, a cabin he never mentioned. The cabin was only 8 miles from where Emily's bracelet was found. A search warrant was requested. Inside the abandoned cabin, investigators discovered decades of dust, old furniture, broken tools, and hidden behind a wall panel, a small metal box. Inside were photographs, letters, and one item that immediately stopped investigators, A newspaper clipping. October 1989. Emily Dawson's disappearance. On the back of the clipping, written in faded ink, were 3 words. She knew everything. The investigation had spent 35 years asking where Emily went. Now detectives were asking a different question. What did Emily know? Because whatever secret she discovered, someone had been desperate enough to silence her. And inside that hidden box, the first real clue to the truth was finally waiting. The discovery inside Thomas Vale's abandoned cabin changed the case from a mystery into something far more disturbing. For 35 years, Emily Dawson's disappearance had been a story of unanswered questions, a missing woman, an abandoned car, a forgotten fingerprint, a community searching for closure. But the hidden box revealed something investigators had never considered. Emily was not simply taken. She was silenced. Because the phrase written on the back of the newspaper clipping changed everything. She knew everything. 3 words. 3 words that suggested Emily Dawson had uncovered a secret, something someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. The detectives photographed every item inside the metal box, every letter, every photograph, every piece of paper. Nothing was moved until forensic teams arrived. The box itself was old. Rust covered the edges. The lock had been broken years earlier. But inside was a carefully preserved collection, almost like someone wanted these things remembered or feared they would be discovered. Among the photographs was one that immediately caught Mark Reynolds' attention, a picture of Emily, standing outside Cedar Hollow High School, smiling, holding a folder. The photograph appeared ordinary, until investigators noticed something in the background. Thomas Vale, watching her, not talking to her, not walking with her, just standing several yards away, looking directly at her. The photo had been taken months before Emily disappeared. The question was obvious. Who took the photograph? And why? The answer came from the back. A date, a location, and a handwritten note. First warning. Mark felt the weight of the discovery, because this was no longer just evidence. It was a timeline. Thomas had been watching Emily before the night she vanished. The investigation moved quickly. Detectives searched through every item in the box. They found more photographs, more notes, more evidence that Thomas had followed Emily's life closely, her schedule, her meetings, her routines. At first, investigators considered obsession, a person developing an unhealthy attachment. But then they found something else, a document hidden beneath the photographs, a copy of a school financial report, 1 page highlighted, a missing amount of money, thousands of dollars, money connected to a school program Emily managed, the same program that helped struggling students, the same program Emily was proud of, the same program she had recently started investigating. Now the case changed again. Emily wasn't only looking into someone's personal secret. She may have been investigating a crime. The detectives reviewed old records from Cedar Hollow High School. The financial reports had never been deeply examined in 1989. At the time, police focused entirely on finding Emily. They never questioned why she might have disappeared. They assumed she was the victim of a random act. But the new evidence suggested Emily had discovered something connected to her own workplace. The financial investigation revealed missing funds over several years. Small amounts, easy to overlook, but together, a pattern. And one name appeared repeatedly, Thomas Vale. He had been responsible for approving certain expenses. He had access. He had opportunity. And Emily had noticed. The next discovery came from Emily's old office. After obtaining permission from her family, investigators searched through archive materials that had been stored away for decades. Inside one box, they found Emily's personal notes. Most were ordinary. Student information, meeting schedules, community projects. Then they found a journal entry from 2 weeks before she disappeared. The writing was short. Urgent. I found a connection. It's bigger than I thought. Another entry. Thomas knows I found something. The room became silent because Emily had written his name, not a stranger, not an unknown person. Thomas Vale, the man whose fingerprint was found inside her car, the man who lied about knowing her, the man who had secretly documented her life. The cold case suddenly had a direction, but investigators still needed to understand the final night. What happened after Emily left the market? Who followed her? Why was her car abandoned? And where was she taken? The answer peered through a witness who had remained silent for decades. His name was Robert Kane. In 1989, he worked at a nearby gas station. At the time, investigators interviewed him briefly. He said he saw nothing unusual. But when he saw the reopened investigation on the news, he contacted police. I remembered something. Mark met with him immediately. Robert explained that on the night Emily disappeared, he saw two vehicles near the roadside market, Emily's silver sedan and a dark blue truck. What was unusual about the truck? It was parked where nobody would park, meaning it was hidden. Robert said he saw someone standing near it, a man watching the market. Could you identify him? Robert hesitated, then nodded. The police showed him several photographs. When he reached Thomas Vale's picture, he stopped. That's him. The statement sent shockwaves through investigators, because now Thomas was not just connected through a fingerprint, he was connected through a witness. But there was another problem. The truck. Investigators searched old vehicle records. They found that Thomas Vale owned a dark blue pickup truck in 1989, the same type described by Robert. The truck had been sold only months after Emily disappeared. The new owner had no idea of its history. Detectives located the vehicle. It had changed hands several times. But modern forensic testing provided another opportunity. The truck was examined. Inside the old door frame, investigators found something unexpected, a small stain. Too old to identify visually, but enough for DNA testing. The results would take weeks. And while they waited, another discovery emerged. A former student of Thomas Vale contacted investigators. She had seen the news. She had heard his name. And she remembered something from 1989, something she had buried for decades. Her name was Megan Ellis. She was 17 years old when Emily disappeared. She told a detective that weeks before Emily vanished, Thomas asked her strange questions about Emily, about her schedule, about where she spent time alone. At first, Megan thought it was harmless, a teacher being curious. But after Emily disappeared, Thomas warned her, "Don't talk about things you don't understand." Megan never forgot those words, because she realized something years later. Thomas wasn't asking questions. He was collecting information. The evidence against Thomas Vale was growing, but the biggest mystery remained. Why did he keep the evidence? Why keep photographs? Why save newspaper clippings? Why preserve reminders of the crime? Detectives believed the answer was hidden inside the final item from the metal box, a small cassette tape, unmarked, undated, unknown. For 35 years, nobody knew it existed. The tape was sent to audio specialists. The recording was damaged. The voice was faint. But after restoration, a sound appeared. A conversation. A man's voice. A woman's voice. And one sentence that made investigators freeze. Emily Dawson's voice. Alive. Afraid. Whispering. "Thomas, if they find out what you did..." The recording stopped. The room went silent. Because after 35 years, investigators finally heard Emily Dawson again, and her last words suggested something terrifying. Thomas Vale was not the only person involved. Someone else was hiding. Someone Emily feared even more. Someone whose identity had remained buried since 1989. The restored audio recording became the most important piece of evidence in the investigation. For 35 years, Emily Dawson had existed only through photographs, missing posters, old newspaper articles, memories from people who loved her. Her voice had disappeared on the night she vanished. Until now. Until the damaged cassette tape brought her back. The forensic audio specialist spent days cleaning the recording. Every second mattered. The tape had suffered decades of damage. Static covered the conversation. Parts were distorted. But the voices remained. And the more investigators listened, the more disturbing the recording became. The conversation appeared to take place inside a vehicle. A woman's voice. Emily. Her breathing was fast. She sounded frightened. Then a man spoke. Thomas Vale. At least according to investigators. The first clear words recovered from the tape were enough to change the direction of the entire case. You don't understand what you found. Emily responded. I know exactly what I found. A pause. Then Thomas said, You have no idea who you're dealing with. Those words became the focus of the investigation, because they suggested Thomas Vale was not acting alone. He was afraid. Not angry. Not confident. Afraid. The detectives listened again, and again, trying to identify every sound, every movement, every voice. Then they heard something else. A third sound. A car door opening. Another person approaching. Emily's voice changed immediately. Why is he here? A second male voice appeared. The recording was damaged. The words were unclear. But one phrase survived. She cannot leave. The room went silent. Because that sentence changed everything. Emily Dawson was not simply confronted by Thomas Vale. Someone else was there. Someone who had power over him. Someone Thomas feared. The investigation expanded. Detectives returned to Thomas Vale's history. They examined his entire life before Cedar Hollow. Every job. Every relationship. Every connection. Then they discovered something unexpected. Before becoming a teacher, Thomas Vale worked as an accountant for a private company in Seattle. The company had collapsed after a financial scandal. Millions of dollars disappeared. Several employees were investigated. One name appeared in the records, Thomas Vale, but he was never charged. The reason? A senior executive took responsibility. That executive's name was Richard Mercer, a wealthy businessman, a powerful figure, and someone who had moved to Cedar Hollow shortly before Emily disappeared. Investigators searched deeper. Richard Mercer had invested in local businesses, including Cedar Hollow High School programs, including the student assistance fund Emily managed, the same fund where money had disappeared. Suddenly, the connection became impossible to ignore. Emily had not discovered a simple accounting mistake. She had uncovered a financial operation, a hidden system, a relationship between Thomas Vale and Richard Mercer. The question was Thomas protecting Mercer, or was Mercer controlling Thomas? Investigators searched for Richard Mercer. They expected difficulty. They found something worse. Richard Mercer was dead. He had died in 2003. A heart attack. No criminal record. No public controversy. A respected businessman until the end. The one person who could answer the biggest questions was gone. But detectives discovered something inside his estate. A collection of private documents. Among them, a letter from Thomas Vale, dated November 1989, only weeks after Emily disappeared. The letter was short, but terrifying. I did what you asked. Nobody knows. Investigators immediately knew. Thomas was not the leader. He was following orders. The question was, what did Mercer ask him to do, and why? The investigation returned to Emily's final days. Detectives rebuilt her movements hour by hour. 3 days before she vanished, Emily met with Richard Mercer. Officially, the meeting was about school funding. But Emily's journal suggested something else. She wrote, Mercer knows about the missing money. He knows Thomas is involved. This created a shocking possibility. Emily wasn't investigating Thomas. She was investigating Mercer. Thomas was only the connection. The person behind everything was someone far more powerful. Someone who believed money could erase the truth. The detectives then searched old communication records. In 1989, before digital tracking existed, phone records were limited, but one detail survived: a series of calls between Thomas Vale and Richard Mercer. The final call happened on the night Emily disappeared, at 8:15 p.m., 1 hour before Emily arrived at the market. The call lasted 37 minutes. What was discussed? Nobody knew, but investigators now believe that conversation set everything in motion. Then came another breakthrough. The DNA results from the blue truck arrived. The sample was old, damaged, but usable. The laboratory confirmed something shocking. Biological material recovered from inside the truck belonged to Emily Dawson. The missing woman had been inside Thomas Vale's vehicle. After 35 years, the question of whether Thomas was involved was no longer speculation. It was evidence. But investigators still needed to know what happened after. Where did Emily go? And who was the second person on the tape? The answer came from a location nobody had searched before: Richard Mercer's abandoned property outside Cedar Hollow. After his death, the land was sold. The buildings were demolished. But old property records revealed something important. A small underground storage room beneath the main house had never been documented. Investigators obtained permission to search. Inside the hidden room, they found decades of store materials, old financial documents, photographs, personal files, and one box labeled. Inside were records connecting Mercer to the missing funds, payments, transfers, names, and one document that made investigators stop: a list of people who knew too much. At the bottom, Emily Dawson. Beside her name was a handwritten note: "Problem must be resolved." The phrase sent shockwaves through the department because it showed planning, intent, a decision. Emily was not a random victim. She was a threat, and someone decided she needed to disappear. But the final discovery inside the hidden room was even more disturbing: a photograph taken after Emily vanished. A photograph showing Thomas Vale, Richard Mercer, and a third person standing beside a vehicle. The vehicle was familiar: Emily's silver sedan. The third person's face was partially hidden, but investigators recognized one detail: a distinctive ring. A ring belonging to someone who had never been considered suspicious. Someone who had spent decades presenting himself as one of Emily's biggest supporters. The person in the photograph was Emily Dawson's closest friend, the person who helped organize the search, the person who comforted her family, and the person detectives had never looked at twice, because nobody believed a friend could be part of the nightmare. But now the evidence suggested something terrifying. Emily Dawson had not disappeared because of one person's secret. She disappeared because 3 people were protecting the same truth. And after 35 years, the final hidden name was finally coming into focus. The photograph recovered from Richard Mercer's hidden storage room became the image that reopened every unanswered question surrounding Emily Dawson's disappearance. For 35 years, investigators believed they were searching for one person, one suspect, one explanation. But the photograph revealed something far more disturbing. Emily's disappearance was not the act of a desperate individual. It was a secret protected by multiple people. People who stood together. People who watched the investigation unfold. People who knew exactly what happened while an entire town searched for a missing woman. The photograph was examined frame by frame. Forensic specialists enhanced the image. The lighting was improved. The faces became clearer. The location was confirmed. The picture had been taken near Richard Mercer's private property. The date printed on the back was October 17th, 1989, 8 days after Emily disappeared. 8 days after her family began begging for answers. 8 days after volunteers searched forests and roads looking for any sign of her. And in the photograph, Thomas Vale was standing there. Richard Mercer was standing there. And between them was another person. A person investigators recognized immediately: Sarah Whitman, Emily Dawson's closest friend, the woman who had spent weeks comforting Emily's family. The woman who organized candlelight vigils. The woman who appeared in newspaper interviews asking the public for information. The woman everyone believed was helping find the truth. The discovery created a wave of disbelief. Because Sarah Whitman was not just a friend. She was the last person known to speak with Emily before she disappeared. In 1989, Sarah told investigators that she had called Emily earlier that evening. A normal conversation. A short conversation. Nothing important. But the new evidence suggested otherwise. Mark Reynolds requested every record connected to Sarah, and immediately inconsistencies appeared. Sarah claimed she had only known Thomas Vale through Emily, but old-school records showed something different. Sarah and Thomas had worked together years earlier. They had attended community meetings together. They had shared financial projects. They were not strangers. They had history. Then investigators discovered another connection. Sarah Whitman had also received money from Richard Mercer's foundation. Small payments. Different dates. Different reasons. But the same source. The same hidden network. The case had become a web. Thomas. Mercer. Sarah. 3 people connected by money, secrets, and a missing woman. Detectives interviewed Sarah again. This time, the conversation was completely different. The first time in 1989, she was emotional. She cried. She begged investigators to find Emily. Now, 35 years later, she appeared calm, almost prepared. When detectives placed a photograph on the table, Sarah looked at it for several seconds. Then she said something unexpected. I knew this day would come. The detectives exchanged looks, because that sentence sounded less like surprise and more like acceptance. Sarah admitted she knew Thomas and Mercer. She admitted she had met them on the night Emily disappeared, but she denied knowing any plan. I thought they were going to scare her. The room became silent. Scare her? Sarah looked down. Emily was going to expose everything. What everything? Sarah took a deep breath. The money, the school fund, the fraud. She explained that Emily had discovered years of financial manipulation. Richard Mercer had been moving money through different organizations. Thomas Vale helped cover the records. Sarah claimed she became involved because she wanted to protect herself. But investigators focused on one thing. She admitted she was there. She admitted she knew Emily was taken. And she admitted she never told police. For 35 years, she stayed silent. The question was why. Sarah said Mercer threatened her. She claimed he controlled everyone connected to the operation. He had money, influence, connections. She believed speaking out would destroy her life. But investigators had another question. Why did you help search for Emily? Sarah looked confused. What? You organized searches. You spoke publicly. You comforted her family. Sarah said nothing, because there was no easy explanation. The investigators believed Sarah played a crucial role, not because she planned Emily's disappearance, but because she helped maintain the illusion. She became part of the story everyone believed, the grieving friend, the loyal supporter, the person looking for answers, while hiding the fact that she already knew the truth. The case reached a turning point when investigators discovered a hidden recording from Richard Mercer's office. The recording had been found inside the underground storage room. It was not audio from the night Emily disappeared. It was recorded months earlier, a conversation between Mercer and Thomas. The audio was clear. Mercer said, "She is getting too close." Thomas responded, "She doesn't know enough." Mercer replied, "People who ask questions eventually know too much." The conversation confirmed what investigators suspected. Emily was targeted because she discovered something, but the recording revealed another detail. Mercer mentioned someone else, a person named David, a name investigators had never connected to the case. They searched immediately. David Whitman, Sarah's husband, a former county prosecutor, a man who had reviewed parts of Emily's case in 1989. The discovery was shocking, because David Whitman had access to the investigation. He had access to evidence. He had access to information only law enforcement should have known. Investigators reopened every report he touched. They discovered something disturbing. Several pieces of evidence had been delayed. Several leads were never followed. Several interviews were incomplete. Not enough to prove corruption, but enough to raise serious questions. Then they found the most important detail: the unidentified fingerprint inside Emily's car. The fingerprint that eventually led investigators to Thomas Vale. The original report showed something strange. The print had been classified as low priority, but a handwritten note beside it stated, possible relevance. Compare later. Later never came. Someone stopped a comparison. Someone made sure the fingerprint stayed buried, and the signature approving that decision belonged to David Whitman. The case had reached a shocking conclusion. The person who helped hide the evidence was not outside the investigation. He was inside it. The retired officer who reopened the case realized something painful. 35 years ago, the answer was not impossible to find. The evidence existed. The clues existed. The fingerprint existed. But someone had made sure nobody looked closely enough. The investigation now focused on the Whitman family. David was located at his home outside Seattle. He was 79 years old. When detectives arrived, he immediately knew why they were there. Unlike Thomas Vale, he did not pretend. He invited them inside. On the table sat an old photograph. Emily Dawson, Sarah Whitman, Thomas Vale, Richard Mercer. A picture from before everything collapsed. David looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "She was never supposed to die." The detectives heard those words before, almost identical to Michael Harper's statement in another case, a phrase used by people who wanted to separate intention from consequence. David admitted he knew about the financial scheme. He admitted he protected Mercer, but he insisted he did not know Emily would be harmed. "I thought they were going to convince her to stay quiet." "Who?" David looked away. "Richard." The detectives asked the final question. What happened to Emily Dawson? David remained silent for nearly a minute. Then he opened a drawer. Inside was a small envelope, a piece of evidence he had kept hidden for decades. He placed it on the table. This is the last thing Emily ever wrote. The envelope contained a handwritten note. Emily's handwriting, dated the night she disappeared. Only one sentence was visible. "If something happens to me, look beneath the old Cedar Hollow Bridge." The detectives froze, because for 35 years, everyone searched the forests, the properties, but nobody searched beneath the bridge, the place Emily herself had named. And suddenly, the cold case had a new location, a forgotten place, a hidden place, a place where the final answer may have been waiting all along. The old Cedar Hollow Bridge had been standing for nearly a century, a forgotten structure crossing a narrow river outside town. Most residents barely noticed it anymore. The road had been replaced years earlier. The bridge was no longer part of daily life. Children used to walk across it. Farmers used the path to reach distant fields. But by 1989, it had become a place people passed without thinking, a place swallowed by time. And now, after 35 years of unanswered questions, it became the center of the investigation, because Emily Dawson herself had left one final clue, a handwritten message, a warning, a desperate attempt to make sure the truth would eventually be found. "If something happens to me, look beneath the old Cedar Hollow Bridge." Those words changed everything. For decades, investigators searched the places they believed made sense. The forests, the highways, the abandoned buildings. But Emily had pointed somewhere else, somewhere hidden, somewhere nobody thought to look. The search began before sunrise. Detectives arrived with forensic teams. The area beneath the bridge was difficult to access. Overgrown vegetation covered the riverbank. Mud surrounded the old support beams. Years of storms had changed the landscape, but investigators knew something important. Time destroys evidence, but it also hides evidence. And sometimes, the thing everyone misses is the thing that survives. The first hours produced nothing. only broken wood, rusting metal, old trash, nothing connected to Emily. Then one forensic technician noticed something unusual. A section of concrete beneath the bridge looked different, newer, a repair patch. But records showed no official construction work had ever been done there. The team removed the damaged concrete carefully. Behind it was a small hidden compartment. Inside was a plastic container, sealed, protected, waiting. The investigators gathered around as the container was opened. Inside were documents, photographs, a small digital storage device, and one object that immediately changed the case. Emily Dawson's necklace. The necklace her mother had described during the original investigation. The necklace Emily wore every day. The discovery was emotional. After 35 years, a piece of Emily had finally returned. But the container held something even more important. Evidence. The photographs showed meetings, private conversations, financial exchanges, and among them, images of Thomas Vale, Richard Mercer, David Whitman, and Sarah Whitman, together, planning, discussing, watching. The investigators realized the container was not hidden by the killer. It was hidden by Emily. She had collected evidence before she disappeared. She knew something was wrong. She knew someone was watching her, and she had created a backup plan. If she couldn't expose the truth herself, someone else would find it. The digital storage device was sent for analysis. The files inside revealed years of hidden transactions, payments from Richard Mercer, transfers through fake organizations, records showing money taken from school programs, and emails between several people involved. One message stood out, sent 3 days before Emily disappeared, from Thomas Vale to Richard Mercer. She found the documents. She won't stop. Mercer responded. Then make sure she stops. The message was short, but devastating, because it destroyed the idea that Emily's disappearance was an accident. She was targeted. She was threatened. She was silenced. The investigation now had evidence connecting everyone. Thomas Vale, Richard Mercer, Sarah Whitman, David Whitman. But one question remained. What exactly happened that night? The audio recording provided pieces. The documents provided motive. The fingerprint provided physical evidence. But the final moment of Emily's life remained unknown until investigators discovered another file hidden inside the storage device. A video recorded from a security camera. The quality was poor. The image was black and white. The footage was from a private road near Richard Mercer's property. The timestamp showed October 17, 1989, the night Emily disappeared. Investigators watched in silence. A vehicle entered the frame. Emily's silver sedan. Behind it, a dark blue pickup truck. Thomas Vale's truck. The vehicle stopped. 3 people exited. Emily, Thomas, and another person. A person whose identity was hidden by darkness. But then the figure moved closer to the camera. The image improved. The investigators recognized him. David Whitman, the prosecutor, the man who had helped control the investigation, the man who had hidden the fingerprint, the man who had kept Emily's final note secret. The discovery changed the case again, because David spent 35 years claiming he was only a lawyer who reviewed paperwork. Now he was seen at the location where Emily disappeared, with the people responsible. The detectives confronted David again. This time, he could not deny being there, but he still refused to admit murder. I didn't hurt her. Then why were you there? David looked exhausted. Because I realized too late what they were going to do. The detectives asked, why didn't you stop them? David said nothing, because the answer was obvious. Fear, self-preservation, a choice. He chose silence. And that silence cost Emily her life. But David revealed something unexpected. He claimed Richard Mercer had planned everything. Not Thomas. Not Sarah. Mercer. The wealthy businessman who controlled the entire operation. David said Mercer believed Emily had collected enough evidence to destroy everyone involved. He couldn't let that happen. What happened after she disappeared? David looked down. I don't know. The detectives knew he was lying because he knew more. Everyone knew more. The problem was that everyone had spent decades protecting the same secret. Then investigators found another hidden file. A recording made after Emily disappeared. A meeting. Thomas, Sarah, David, Richard. The conversation was brief, but one sentence changed everything. David said, "We need to find her before the police do." The room went silent, because those words proved something investigators had suspected. The search for Emily was not only a public investigation, it was also a private search by the people responsible. They were not looking for Emily to save her. They were looking for evidence. They were looking for what she left behind. And that explained everything. The fingerprint, the missing evidence, the false leads, the delays. They were not mistakes. They were protection. The cold case that haunted Washington for decades was finally revealing its true shape. Emily Dawson had uncovered a criminal network hidden behind respectability. Teachers, lawyers, business leaders, community figures, people everyone trusted. But as investigators prepared the final arrests, one question remained. Where was Emily? The evidence proved what happened. The evidence proved who was responsible. But her family still needed one final answer. They needed to know where she had been for 35 years. And beneath the old Cedar Hollow Bridge, another discovery was waiting. A discovery that would finally reveal the fate of Emily Dawson. The discovery beneath the Cedar Hollow Bridge changed the investigation forever. For 35 years, Emily Dawson's family lived with the same impossible question. Where did she go? Not who was responsible. Not why she disappeared. Where? Because even after investigators uncovered the conspiracy surrounding her disappearance, one painful truth remained. Emily was still missing. Her family had answers about the people involved, but they still had no place to mourn, no final goodbye, no certainty, only memories. And for the Dawson family, the investigation was not complete, not until Emily came home. The forensic team continued examining the hidden container beneath the bridge. The documents were carefully preserved. The photographs were cataloged. The digital files were copied and secured. But investigators focused on one item they had not yet fully analyzed. A small handwritten notebook. The cover was damaged. The pages were stained from years underground. But inside was Emily's handwriting, her thoughts, her fears, her final days. The notebook began 3 months before her disappearance. At first, it looked ordinary. Notes about students, appointments, community events, small details of daily life. Then the tone changed. The entries became darker, more urgent. Emily began documenting things she noticed: missing financial records, unusual conversations, people acting differently, especially Thomas Vale. One entry read, "Thomas knows I am looking into the accounts. He pretends to help, but he is afraid." Another, "Mercer is not the beginning. He is only protecting someone else." That sentence stopped investigators, because Emily believed Richard Mercer was not the top of the operation. There was someone above him, someone with more control, someone even more powerful. The investigators searched every document again. They reviewed every name, every connection. Then they discovered something hidden inside Richard Mercer's financial records. A company that appeared only once. A private corporation created in 1987. The owner was not Mercer. The owner was a trust. And the person controlling the trust was William Cross. A name that had never appeared in the investigation. A name that had been completely overlooked. William Cross was a retired judge, a respected figure in Washington. a man who had served the community for decades, a man who had advised local organizations, a man who had publicly supported Emily's family after her disappearance. The discovery was shocking because William Cross had not been a suspect. He had been considered a supporter. He had attended memorial events. He had spoken about finding justice for Emily. But the documents revealed something else. William Cross had financial connections to Mercer. He had approved legal decisions that benefited the same network. And most disturbing of all, he had known Emily, not casually, personally. Years before her disappearance, Emily had worked with Cross on a youth program. She trusted him. She respected him. She believed he was one of the few people who could help expose corruption. The notebook revealed that Emily planned to meet with him the day after she disappeared. She believed William Cross could help, but investigators now wondered, did Emily trust the wrong person? The case expanded again. Detectives searched William Cross's background. His career was nearly flawless. Awards, public recognition, a reputation built over decades. But beneath that image were hidden connections. He had protected people. He had influenced investigations. He had controlled information. And in 1989, he had access to the investigation. The original detectives were shocked when they learned this, because William Cross had been one of the people advising the department during the early search. He had helped coordinate legal procedures. He had reviewed evidence requests. He had been close enough to influence the investigation. And nobody questioned him, because people rarely suspect a person who appears to be helping. Mark Reynolds felt something he had not felt before: anger. Not because the case was difficult, because it was hidden in plain sight. The evidence was there. The names were there. The connections were there. But everyone looked in the wrong direction. The investigation moved toward William Cross. But before detectives could confront him, they received unexpected information. A retired police dispatcher named Helen Carter contacted them. She had worked the night Emily disappeared. She had never spoken publicly, but after seeing the reopened investigation, she felt she could no longer remain silent. I remember the call. Mark met with her immediately. What call? Helen looked nervous. The call from Emily. The room went silent, because official records showed Emily never contacted emergency services. Number 911 call. No police report. Nothing. Helen explained that in 1989, before digital systems, not every call was properly recorded, especially calls that came through local lines. She remembered Emily's voice. Quiet, scared. She didn't have much time. What did she say? Helen closed her eyes. She said, "If they know I have the papers, they will come for me." Mark asked, "Did she say who?" Helen nodded. "Yes." The detective leaned forward. "Who?" Helen answered, "William." The name changed everything, because now investigators had something they never had before: a direct connection between Emily and the person who may have controlled the entire operation. The detectives searched for William Cross, but they discovered another problem. He was gone. Not missing. Not dead. Gone. His house had been sold months earlier, his phone disconnected, his records transferred. It looked like someone had prepared, like someone knew investigators were coming. The search for William Cross became national, and after several weeks, they found him. Living under a different name in Montana. When detectives arrived, William Cross did not deny his identity. He simply looked at them and said, "I wonder when Emily's secret would finally come out." Those words shocked investigators, because he said Emily's secret, not his, not the family's, Emily's. During questioning, William claimed Emily had misunderstood everything. He said she discovered information she could not understand. He said she became paranoid. He said Thomas, Mercer, and the others were trying to calm her down. But investigators noticed something. He never asked where Emily was. He never asked what evidence had been found. He already knew. Then Mark placed a notebook on the table. Emily's handwriting, her final thoughts, her fear. William looked at the pages, and for the first time, his expression changed. A small crack, a moment of fear. Because one entry contained something nobody expected. A name. Not Thomas, not Mercer, not David. William. Emily had written, "William Cross knows the truth. If I disappeared, he is the reason." The room went quiet. After 35 years, Emily Dawson had named the person she feared most, and investigators finally understood. The people around her were not the architects. They were pieces. Thomas Vale, Richard Mercer, Sarah Whitman, David Whitman. They were all protecting something, but William Cross was the person who connected them all. The cold case had finally reached the center, but one final mystery remained. What happened after Emily discovered the truth? What did William Cross do with her? And where had he hidden her for 35 years? Because the evidence was pointing toward a horrifying possibility. Emily Dawson had not vanished. She had been hidden. And somewhere in Washington, the final secret of the cold case was still waiting to be uncovered. The name William Cross changed the entire shape of the investigation. For decades, investigators believed Emily Dawson's disappearance was a crime built around greed, money, missing funds, corruption, a financial secret powerful people wanted to protect. But the evidence now suggested something much darker. The money was only the surface. The real reason Emily disappeared was because she uncovered the people behind it. People who were never supposed to be connected. People who built their reputations on trust. A teacher, a lawyer, a businessman, a respected judge, all connected by one secret. And at the center of it all, William Cross, the retired judge who spent decades appearing to search for justice. The man who spoke publicly about bringing Emily home. The man who privately knew exactly why she vanished. Investigators returned to the original case files. This time, they weren't looking for mistakes. They were looking for influence. Every decision, every delay, every unexplained failure. And slowly, a pattern appeared. The first search area changed. The evidence requests delayed. The interviews limited. The fingerprint analysis stopped. The investigation had not failed. It had been controlled. The person controlling it had never needed to hide evidence. He only needed to control where people looked. William Cross understood the system. He knew how investigations worked. He knew how to create doubt, how to slow progress, how to make unanswered questions appear normal. And for 35 years, it worked. But now the system was turning against him. The first major breakthrough came from an old courthouse archive. Investigators searched records connected to William Cross's legal career. Inside a forgotten storage room, they found boxes that had never been digitized. Most contained ordinary court documents. Then they discovered a sealed file. The label was simple: Cedar Hollow Property Review, 1989. Inside were documents connected to the exact time Emily disappeared. The file showed that William Cross had been investigating the same financial issues Emily discovered. But there was something strange. The investigation had ended suddenly. No conclusion. No final report. No explanation. Just silence. Attached to the file was a handwritten note. Matter resolved privately. Those words sent chills through investigators. Because nothing about Emily's discovery was private. A woman disappeared. A criminal network protected itself. And someone decided the truth should remain buried. The investigators searched for the original documents from that file. Most were missing, but one page remained. A summary written by William Cross himself. It described Emily as a risk, not a witness, not a concerned employee. A risk. The language was cold, calculated, like Emily was not a person, like she was a problem to remove. The prosecution team reviewed the evidence. They knew the case was finally coming together, but they still needed one thing: a direct connection between William Cross and Emily's disappearance. Then came the discovery from Thomas Vale. After investigators confronted him with the new evidence, he requested another interview. This time, he wanted to talk. Thomas arrived looking exhausted, older, broken. The confidence he once displayed was gone. He knew the truth had caught up with him. "I need to tell Emily's family what happened." Those were his first words. He admitted he had lied. He admitted he helped cover the investigation. He admitted he was present the night Emily disappeared. But he claimed he was not the person who planned it. William Cross controlled everything. Thomas explained that Richard Mercer handled money. David Whitman handled legal problems. Sarah Whitman handled appearances. And Thomas was the person close to Emily, the person who could get information, the person who could gain her trust. That was his role. He said William Cross knew Emily would eventually discover the fraud, because Emily was too careful, too intelligent, too determined. She kept asking questions nobody wanted answered. Thomas admitted he tried to convince Emily to stop. He warned her. He threatened her. But she refused. Then came the night of October 17, 1989. Thomas described what happened. Emily agreed to meet him because she believed he had information that could help her. She thought he was finally ready to tell the truth. Instead, he brought her to Richard Mercer's property. William Cross was already there, waiting. Emily realized immediately. She knew. She understood. And according to Thomas, she said one sentence: "I trusted you." Those words stayed with him for 35 years. Thomas claimed Emily was never supposed to disappear permanently. The plan was to scare her, to take the evidence, to force her into silence. But William Cross had other plans. What did he do? Thomas looked down. He decided she was too dangerous. The detectives asked a question they had been waiting years to ask. "Where's Emily Dawson?" Thomas remained silent. Then he gave him an answer. The old Mercer property. Investigators immediately returned. The property had already been searched. But Thomas revealed something they never knew. A second structure. An underground room. A place William Cross had access to. A place hidden from official records. The search began immediately. The old property was surrounded by investigators. Forensic teams entered the underground area. The room was small. Concrete walls. No windows. No electricity. A place designed to hide something. Inside they found evidence. Emily's personal items. Her purse. Her jacket. Her school ID. Objects that confirmed what everyone feared. But investigators also found something else. A small tape recorder, still sealed inside a plastic bag. Inside the recorder was a tape. Emily's voice. The final recording. The room became completely silent as investigators listened. The audio began with movement, a door closing, footsteps. Then Emily. Her voice was calm, but frightened. "I know what you did." A man's voice responded. "William Cross. You should have walked away." Emily replied, "People deserve to know the truth." Then a long silence. And the final words recovered from a recording. Emily said, "You can't erase me." The tape ended. Investigators sat in silence, because those words explained everything. Emily knew she might not survive, but she believed the truth would, and after 35 years, she was right. The discovery beneath the Mercer property became national news. The cold case that haunted Washington for decades had finally reached its darkest moment. William Cross was arrested. Thomas Vale was arrested. Sarah Whitman and David Whitman were also charged for their roles in the cover-up. The community that once searched for Emily gathered again. But this time, they were not holding missing posters. They were holding photographs, remembering a woman who refused to stop asking questions, a woman who believed the truth mattered more than fear. But one mystery remained. The investigators had found Emily's belongings. They had found the evidence. They had found the people responsible, but they still had not found the final answer. The question Emily's family had carried for 35 years. Where was Emily Dawson? Because beneath the old Mercer property, there was one empty space, one missing piece. One final secret William Cross had taken to his grave, and until that last piece was found, the cold case was not completely solved. For 35 years, Emily Dawson's family waited for one moment. Not an arrest, not a confession, not a headline. They wanted one thing, to know where Emily was, because the truth had finally exposed the people responsible. The names were known. The lies were uncovered. The conspiracy was broken. But the most painful question remained unanswered. Where was Emily Dawson? The investigation had reached a strange point, a place where justice was finally moving forward. But closure was still out of reach. The evidence beneath the Mercer property was overwhelming. Emily's belongings, the hidden recordings, the financial documents, the photographs, the conversations. Everything pointed toward the same conclusion. Emily had been taken there. Emily had confronted the people involved. Emily had discovered the truth. But there was no body, no final resting place, no way for her family to say goodbye. And for investigators, that meant one thing. Someone was still hiding something. The search focused on William Cross. Even after his arrest, he remained calm, almost too calm. He understood the law. He understood evidence. He understood how long investigations could take. For decades, he had controlled information. He believed he could control the ending, too. During his first official interrogation after the discovery, detectives placed every piece of evidence in front of him. The fingerprint, the recordings, the photographs, Emily's notebook, the financial records. William looked at everything. Then he smiled. Not a confident smile, a tired one. You finally found what she left behind. The detectives noticed his wording, not what they found, what she left behind. As if Emily had planned everything, as if even in her final moments, she had been one step ahead. The investigators asked about Emily's location. William refused. He claimed he did not know. They asked about the underground room. He denied knowing about it. They showed him the evidence. He remained silent. Then one detective placed Emily's notebook on the table. The final pages. The pages written shortly before she disappeared. William stared at them, and for the first time, his expression changed, because one entry contained something he never expected investigators to find. A description of a meeting between Emily and William. The entry read, "He told me I was close. He told me some truths are dangerous." William looked away. The detectives knew. That reaction was an answer, but they needed more. They needed the location. They needed Emily. The breakthrough came from someone nobody expected, Sarah Whitman. After seeing the evidence against William Cross, Sarah changed her story. For 35 years, she had carried the weight of what happened. She had convinced herself she was only a witness, not a participant. But the investigation forced her to face reality. She had helped hide the truth. She had protected people who destroyed Emily's life. During a second interview, Sarah finally broke. "I should have told someone." The detectives remained silent because they knew this was not the time for comfort. It was a time for answers. What happened that night? Sarah closed her eyes. Then she started talking. She explained that William Cross had planned a meeting. He told everyone Emily needed to be stopped. He said he could handle it. He promised nobody would get hurt. But Sarah admitted she knew something was wrong, because Emily arrived believing she was meeting Thomas, not William, not everyone else. Thomas had betrayed her trust. Sarah said Emily realized the truth within seconds. She looked at everyone in the room, and she understood she had been trapped. What happened next? Sarah hesitated, then whispered. She fought. The investigators listened carefully. Sarah explained that Emily refused to give him the evidence. She had hidden copies. She told him the truth would come out. She told him people would eventually find out. And William became furious. He said she was going to destroy everything. Sarah revealed something investigators had not known. Emily was alive after the first confrontation, for several hours. That changed the entire timeline, because until then, investigators believed Emily disappeared immediately. But Sarah's statement suggested something different. Emily had survived. She had fought. She had tried to escape. Then Sarah said something that shocked investigators. She got away. The room went silent. What? Sarah looked at the detectives. Emily escaped from property. For the first time in 35 years, a completely different possibility appeared. Emily may not have disappeared inside the Mercer property. She may have left. She may have been alive. Even if only for a short time, the detectives demanded details. Sarah explained that after Emily escaped, William ordered everyone to search. They believed she had taken evidence. They believed she would go to police. But Emily was injured, alone, in the middle of the night, near property surrounded by forests. The investigators immediately returned to the area. They expanded the search, not around the buildings, around the roads, the fields, the river, the places Emily could have reached. And then they found something. A piece of fabric caught on a tree branch, old, weathered, almost destroyed by time, but still there. Forensic testing confirmed it belonged to Emily's jacket. The location was nearly 3 miles from the Mercer property, which meant one thing. Emily had traveled farther than anyone believed. She had made it away. She had survived longer. The search continued. Days became weeks. Then investigators found another discovery, an old abandoned ranger station deep in the forest. Inside was something impossible, a notebook with Emily's handwriting, the final pages, the final evidence, the final moments of her story. The notebook contained only a few sentences, written in a weak, uneven hand. I don't know how long I have. They will keep looking. If someone finds this, tell my family I tried. Investigators struggled to continue reading, because the next sentence revealed something heartbreaking. I was almost home. The phrase haunted everyone. Almost home. After 35 years, those words became the symbol of the entire case. Emily had fought. She had escaped. She had tried to reach safety, but something stopped her. The final page contained one last clue, a location, a place Emily believed she could hide, a place nobody had searched, a place connected to her childhood, the old Dawson family property, a place abandoned since her parents died. Investigators rushed there because after all these years, Emily Dawson may have left behind one final message, one final attempt to be found, and this time, the truth was waiting beneath the ground. The old Dawson family property had been abandoned for nearly 20 years, a forgotten piece of land hidden at the edge of Cedar Hollow, a place where Emily Dawson spent her childhood, a place filled with memories, a place she knew better than anyone. And now, 35 years after she vanished, investigators returned to search for the final answer. The property looked frozen in time. The old wooden house stood beneath tall trees. The paint had faded. The windows were broken. The rooms were covered in dust. But inside that abandoned home was a possibility investigators had never considered. Emily had known this place. She trusted this place. If she escaped from William Cross and the others, this was where she would have gone. The search began slowly. Every room was examined. Every floorboard was checked. Every hidden corner was photographed. The investigators were not only searching for evidence, they were searching for Emily. For the first time in decades, the case felt different. Not like a mystery, like a final journey. Inside the old bedroom where Emily grew up, investigators discovered something strange. A loose floorboard. Hidden beneath it, a small envelope. The paper was damaged. The ink was faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Emily. The envelope contained a letter, not addressed to police, not addressed to investigators, addressed to her family. The discovery left the entire team silent, because Emily had known. She knew there was a chance nobody would find her. She knew the people hunting her had power. She knew she needed to leave something behind. The letter began with a simple sentence. If you are reading this, I hope you know I never gave up. Investigators continued reading. Emily described the night she disappeared. She described Thomas bringing her to the Mercer property. She described seeing William Cross waiting there. She described realizing the people she trusted had betrayed her. But the most shocking part came later. Emily wrote that she escaped. She wrote that she ran into the forest. She wrote that she hid. And then she wrote, I heard them looking for me. The letter revealed something investigators had never known. Emily survived the first night. She survived the attack. She survived the fear. But she knew they would keep searching, because she still had the evidence, the documents, the proof, the information that could destroy everyone involved. Emily wrote that she planned to leave Cedar Hollow. She planned to contact authorities outside the county, someone who could not be controlled, someone William Cross could not influence, but she never made it. The final part of the letter was incomplete. Only one sentence remained. If I don't return, it's because... The writing stopped. The rest of the page was blank. But investigators noticed something. The letter was not finished because Emily stopped writing. It was interrupted. The ink trail ended suddenly. A sign that someone arrived. Someone found her. The investigators searched the property again, this time with a different goal. They were looking for where Emily went after writing the letter. Outside the house, behind an old storage building, they found something unusual, freshly disturbed soil, except it wasn't fresh. It was old, very old. The location had been ignored for decades because it looked like normal ground, but forensic equipment detected something beneath it, a hidden structure, a small underground shelter. The shelter was not part of the original property records. Someone had built it secretly. Inside were several items: a blanket, a flashlight, empty food containers, and a small tape recorder. The investigators immediately recognized the significance. This was not where Emily had been held. This was where she had hidden. The tape recorder was carefully examined. Inside was another recording. Emily's voice. Her final message. The audio began with heavy breathing, the sound of wind. The fear in her voice was impossible to miss. If anyone finds this... A pause. I need you to know the truth. She explained everything. The money. The corruption. The people involved. The names. Thomas. Sarah. David. William. But then her voice became quieter. She said something investigators never expected. William wasn't afraid of me exposing him. A pause. He was afraid of what I found about him. The investigators froze. Because Emily believed the financial crimes were not the biggest secret. There was something else. Something bigger. Something William Cross had protected for years. Emily continued. The money is only one part. The real reason they cannot let me talk. The recording became damaged. Static covered the next words. Then one sentence became clear. They were involved long before Cedar Hollow. The tape ended. The mystery deepened again, because Emily had uncovered something beyond the local corruption, something connected to William Cross's entire career. Investigators reopened every part of his history, and they discovered a pattern. Cases that disappeared. Evidence that was questioned. People who changed their stories. William Cross had not started hiding secrets in 1989. He had been doing it for decades. But the most important discovery came from the shelter. A photograph. Emily and another person, taken years before. A person investigators had never connected to the case. A person who explained why William Cross had been so desperate. The person in the photograph was a federal investigator, a man named Alan Pierce. Years earlier, Pierce had investigated financial crimes connected to William Cross. Then suddenly, he disappeared from public records. No major announcement, no explanation, just gone. The connection was shocking. Emily had discovered that William Cross was connected to another unresolved disappearance, another cold case, another person who may have gotten too close to the truth. The investigators realized Emily was not only trying to expose corruption, she was uncovering a history of people being silenced, and William Cross had spent decades making sure those stories stayed buried. But the biggest revelation came from a final piece of evidence found inside the shelter, a map drawn by Emily, a route through the forest, a path leading away from the Dawson property. At the bottom of the map, Emily had written 3 words: final meeting place. The location was far from Cedar Hollow, deep in the mountains, a place almost impossible to reach. Investigators believed Emily had planned to meet someone there, someone who could help her, someone she trusted. But the question remained, did Emily reach that location, or did someone find her before she got there? The investigation moved into the mountains, and after 35 years, the final chapter of the Washington cold case was about to be uncovered, because hidden deep in the wilderness, investigators found something that would finally reveal what happened to Emily Dawson